10 years ago had been more known as historical tourism or even cultural tourism. I personally like the one given by the Utah State Historical Society. They define it as an activity in which people enjoy the discovery of a place's unique identity derived from its history. A form of tourism based upon the enhancement and protection of cultural resources as an element of tourism resources. Also, some organizations include natural resources in their definitions. Well, certainly, as we probably, most of us know, Florida heritage and cultural landscape includes Native American sites, and I'm glad to see Dr. Annette Snap here today with the Florida Public Archaeology Network. Spanish colonial resources, which we have here in our backyard as well, with head of the Clusa Empire here at Mount Key. That includes pioneer cracker settlements, structures throughout the 19th century, bungalows and other distinctive architecture from the early 20th century, historic downtowns, early roadside attractions and industries, traditions, stories, and more. They are a shared history and contribute to Florida's charm and quality of life. It's historic preservation that maintains a unique sense of place for future generations. Heritage preservation and heritage tourism support each other. Historic preservation provides the setting, the history, the persona, and the tradition for heritage tourism. Heritage tourism provides the opportunity to educate, enjoy, and appreciate historic preservation. Personally, I see the relationship somewhat like a chicken and the egg, as it's hard to have one without the other. Without education and appreciation that heritage tourism provides, preservation is weakened. And without preservation of structures and traditions, there's a very weak foundation for heritage tourism. So to set the stage for today's workshop, those of us concerned with historic preservation realize that historical significance alone rarely ensures preservation of older structures. It's more often economic reasons that determine a building's longevity. This is where historic tourism in all its forms come into play. For preservation to succeed, there needs to be economic sustainability in historic areas. In many small towns, the older historic areas have been bypassed in real estate and commercial development for a variety of reasons. Small towns throughout the nation struggle on how to balance desired redevelopment and still retain their historic character. However, many cities' historic preservation has blended with economic development to create vibrant districts and foster civic pride. Heritage or historic tourism plays a role in their success. Obviously, it's easier for us to understand and see the direct value of heritage or historic tourism in a town such as St. Augustine or Key West. Today, we hope to focus on such towns as Bonita Springs that may lack the grand historic architecture of a DeLand or Tallahassee, and also don't have the population of a Sarasota, St. Pete, or Miami that assist in the support of revitalizing historic histories. When considering revitalization, many cities look to a holistic approach. That approach features ecological, cultural, historical, and outdoor activities. And we may certainly touch on all today, but hope to focus on the cultural or historical aspects. I'm also aware that we're likely to raise more questions than we are answers regarding this complex subject. However, hopefully, our constructive dialogue can serve as a starting point or impetus for local communities. So before we get into the specific topics, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves in respect to your interest and experience with heritage tourism and historic preservation.
Punta Gorda, which is about, 45 minutes up the street, fortunately, has a National Historic Register district, has been for years. The hurricane did not destroy it, so it's still there. Punta Gorda also has a history park where some of the older buildings that were potentially going to be torn down were moved into a central history park. Those two items alone are what brings quite a number of folks to the city. Yes, it's got the waterfront. Yes, we've got some new buildings. We can talk about all that. But people come for the National Register District and for the history park because it's a vital part of a town of 17,000 people. And it's an older town that's been able to keep that register district up and running. And it's very valuable to it.
First of all, thank you, Charlie, and thanks to everyone for putting this on. It's very important, and it is so nice to have it right here, finally. It's so nice. So Shangri-La, thank you very much. Being the mayor of a community who is the last 12 years, we've been trying to do something with our downtown area, and I think it's been clear to many of us that the solution therein would lie for that success would be through some type of historical preservation, historical tourism. It was what we have to offer in the downtown area. Certainly my wife and I realized that the small little residential house that we owned there off of Wilson Street, made in the 1940s. We always enjoyed, we knew that, just as consumers, we enjoyed going places in North Carolina and Georgia that had historical little restaurants and places with the charm and character, things that you can't get in a strip mall someplace. So I think that was really important to us, and so we rolled the dice, not knowing anything about the restaurant business, we decided to start a restaurant. So yeah, I guess the advice of a lot of very smart people, quite frankly. Actually, and during the recession too, so it was kind of a double dumb idea that actually worked out very well. And it's because I think that you ask the people who enjoy the Survey Cafe there's your plug. If you ask them, I think a lot of it has to do with the ambiance and the ability to get off the beaten track there just a bit, the ability to enjoy the natural atmosphere out there, the trees that surround the place, the quaint little building, the wooden floors. They love that part of it. The good food helps, but it's you can get good food in a lot of places, but it's that character that's missing. And I think that's so far as historical heritage. I think that Charlie, when he mentioned that it's an economic thing, that's what will lead to the success of the downtown area. Is when people realize that there is, and it's okay, there is money in restoring buildings and bringing that kind of charm and character to an area that makes people want to come here and spend their dollars here, and instead of an area that's just very, very cold and very sterile. So that's it. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My contribution to things, or from an historic part, Charlie said he invited me because I was the oldest guy he knew, so that was historic preservation himself. So, but in that heritage, I would like to say that not only from a Florida perspective, when I did the research, there's $6.3 billion in terms of historic preservation activities that are either generated from grants and things, and then supplemental money and back and forth. So it is big in Florida. Some of my work has taken us all across the state of Florida, and some of the unique places that I've seen where historical heritage aspects are important are places like Lake Placid. Most of you are familiar now with the Lake Placid murals, but I was trying to dissect some of the things that makes one place like Lake Placid very unique and another place maybe not. And one of the things happened to be when I was a planner back in the, back in the old days, was a couple that went to Telluride, Colorado. Any of you have ever been there, you know that they had a mural system themselves. But what was unique is this husband and wife came back, told Lake Placid that they wanted to do murals that had to do with the Florida heritage of that particular area of Lake Placid in Highlands County. It would have to do with turpentine, had to do with ranchers, had to do with so-and-so. But the quality and the aspects of the murals were not government regulations, which the mayor would like to know that that was true, but it was the regulations that they wanted on those murals so they could be able to reproduce them and they would stay for a long period of time. And the only government aspect of that was to make sure they weren't commercial signs. And once that marched forth, in about 20, 25 years, they ended up having, now they're up to over 30 murals, and it is where they have tours to come to it. So the key to that, if you look at it, was the quality that was made to be the Florida, when I look at it, the Florida murals, and you can go to some of them where you can actually get out of your car and you touch a button and the cows move. It's very good. Story. But anyway.
Don't cows do that anyway when you touch it?
Yeah, but this is different. This is
Depends where you touch it.
Yeah, it depends on where you touch it. But anyway, the aspect of that is that the quality of the murals are very, very unique to that particular area, and they have the preservation and the restrictions that are imposed upon themselves. People will actually spend money for the murals and want to have those because they were able to tie back to the actual activities of the particular business itself and that sort of thing. And so they've become not only a historical standpoint, but an economic catalyst as well. So that's probably one of the unique areas. And another one real quickly is Lake City. They had an historical building that they remodeled, and it's a key part of their CRA, community redevelopment area. And so again, when you see some of those aspects, it always boils down to somebody taking the time to follow through with a particular magnet that then becomes part of something else. And it's not something done over a year or two, but generally it's a time period. You go with your strengths and go from there.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be invited to this seminar. I'm very grateful. Thank you for the invitation. Homestead Main Street is one part of my job. I'm also the chair of the Historic Preservation Board in Homestead. And under that auspice, I shepherded through the Historic District designation application to Tallahassee and then to Washington, D.C. And our 12 acres downtown were designated in 2007. So we have a 12-acre downtown, 72 structure, historically designated district. And that designation did a tremendous amount for our ecotourism and for our historical tourism. It also brought some interesting businesses to us. We now are the location of a Dade Medical College that has moved into our historic buildings. They came in and brought 450 students who are now pedestrians on the street, enjoying our restaurants and our shops. That's been fantastic for us. We've had a tremendous renaissance since that designation. The Homestead, as you know, suffered Hurricane Andrew. When I made the presentation in Tallahassee for the district designation, they said, well, we thought the town was totally wiped off the face of the earth. I said, yes, all the new construction on the east side of town, but on the west side, which is the historic district, buildings were built in the 1920s, 4 feet thick. Those buildings did not move. And they are still there today. So that is our inventory of buildings in the downtown historic district. We don't have great architecture, we're not Jeffersonian, but we're called vernacular. But vernacular is a very important aspect of historic district designations. This is where the farmers and the growers and the planters built with what supplies were at hand. And it's a charming little town. Recently I initiated something called the Greenway Bike Festival, which is a bike ride connecting our, those who know Homestead know that one side we have the Biscayne National Park, on the other side we have the Everglades National Park. And we've been promoting a Greenway trail, bike trail, connecting those two parks, and we have an annual event for around that concept. And we have brought people in from Miami and Tallahassee and everywhere saying, who are avid cyclists, saying this is a charming town downtown. And so we have created much more buzz about the downtown because we maintain the architecture and we maintain the look of the early vernacular style. So raw historic preservation.
Good morning, my name is Bonnie Dearborn, and I was very excited when I talked to Charlie and he invited me to participate in this panel because I first met Charlie back in 2005 and we were talking about the ordinance of becoming a CLG and heritage tourism and so on. At that time, Shangri-La was up for grabs. I mean, nobody knew what was going to happen, and I was so excited when he indicated that we were actually going to meet here, which meant it was still standing, and it looks fabulous. As Charlie pointed out, I did work with the state of Florida for a number of years, administering their South Regional Office. My territory was like 15 counties, which was interesting because it was very little travel money, so you had to really work on that to go anywhere. One of the things that I did was I juried different, they had an annual competition in Key West where they would jury preservation projects as to how they evolved, how they turned out and so on. What is really exciting about Key West is, it's, as Yvonne pointed out, it's all mostly vernacular, wood frame vernacular buildings, conch town and so on. And people, when they did their preservation, coveted the gold star. You had to get a gold star. It was just, everybody wanted the gold star. And only the top, whoever came out at the top of the jury competition got the gold star. So when you would drive down the street and you see a house with a gold star, it was very meaningful. So it was, it's really, everybody in that community was really involved and still is today, preservation. I was very impressed with Bonita Springs years ago when I came here. You're not a very large community, and you had a grant for preservation. The only other city that I know for sure had a grant was in Jacksonville, and it was specific for the downtown area, very defined area. So I thought, my goodness, there was a real excitement here and interest in preservation. And you do have unique buildings here and so on. So I've worked with communities putting things on the National Register. I met Yvonne working with her on the Main Street program down there, and also they have a wonderful Landmarks hotel that became on the NR. I worked with those people. And I lived in Boca Raton for about 28 years and served on the preservation board there, which you really kind of need to do that too. It's one thing to be in an office and talk about preservation, it's something else to sit on the board and deal with the issues and the people and the properties and so on, and still trying to maintain that preservation element. So it was an excellent experience. I live in Delray Beach now, which is about Boca Raton. Delray Beach has a story on its own. We can perhaps talk about that later. The other thing that I am involved with, I do a lot of volunteer. I do local designations because I want to, not necessarily get paid for them, but I do that because to me it's very important. It's the only way they somehow will get done. And it's a struggle. It's a very big struggle. Charlie pointed out it's economics. And so you've got to figure out how to pull everybody together and get that value. And then I also conduct a lot of tours on the historic buildings, trolley tours and so on, as other towns do, West Palm Beach and so on. So these are all things, but the thing that you have to learn most of all is build on what you have. Don't make yourself something you are not. Build on your history, build on what you have. Buildings is where the history is manifested in. That's why it's really important. The history, the people behind that is also very important. Your cultural landscape is important. Build on what you have. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm actually my company is Ensight, and I'm a practicing land planner. And I guess my historic preservation claim to fame is the downtown redevelopment plan for the city of LaBelle. And LaBelle is it's about 4,500 people. Their downtown, or I should say what's left of it actually, is about 3 square blocks. It's not very big, but it terminates on the Caloosahatchee River. And so in 2006, I was hired as a consulting city planner for the city of LaBelle. Really fell in love with the community and realized that that they had a real gem of a downtown that was largely being ignored. But the other thing that I really recognized was that part of their downtown is a community park, which is right on the river. And what I learned was that the community park was truly the heart of the community. That's where everything takes place that's community oriented. And in recognizing the value of that and the need to preserve that and really use that as the basis for not only preserving what was existing or what was left of their historic downtown, but trying to build back on that became a very important thing for me to try to do. So back in 2007, I believe it was, Visit Florida had a grant opportunity that you could submit for, and it would offer a free 4-day workshop where some professional planners and landscape architects would come into town, do some very intense public workshopping with the community, and then based on that, sort of give them the general idea of what could happen in their community. So I submitted for that, and the community was awarded the workshop. And so we spent 4 days with good participation, community participation, and that kind of stemmed or kind of kicked off the need for a redevelopment plan. So what we have done is just we looked at, fortunately for LaBelle and their downtown, the grid system of their streets is still intact. And so it's really just a matter of infill development and preservation of what's left in terms of their existing historic structures. So the redevelopment plan really played on that and plays more on the physical form of the downtown and how important that form is to creating a successful space that is attractive to make people stop and want to spend money in the community. Hendry County has an unemployment rate of about 16%, and their roots are largely, almost exclusively agricultural. It's actually very interesting when you're standing on the sidewalk in their downtown and these big orange trucks come through. I mean, that's not something that someone from Ohio sees every day. So even though it's a little bit intimidating, it's also kind of fascinating to see these big vegetable trucks going through. So the idea is to play on all that and to use their agricultural base as a means of just expanding their economic opportunities without losing the character of their community and what they represent. So, and so based on all of those things, we put together a plan that hopefully will be implemented. It's kind of a work in progress, but at least there's a basis for, if someone comes in and wants to do something, they have the ability to say, no, that doesn't fit into our plan. So, and that was part of the worry, was that, back in the early 2000s when a lot of development was going on, they were getting pounded by a lot of large developers that were coming in with a character of development that didn't fit their community. And one of the concerns was that somebody would come in and actually clear off a couple of acres of this property and come in with something that really didn't fit and would continue to be a loss for the history of the area. So at least they have enough in place now, some basic tools to get started. So I think that's it.
Wonderful. Again, thank you each of the panelists for being here and volunteering your time along. Well, let's just start off with successful on a positive note here of historical tourism, heritage tourism examples that you've seen, particularly in Florida, that have been not just successful but also sustainable. So just some of maybe your favorites, or you go, wow, that's really good that they've done. So, panelists.
The very first priority is that your community, your neighborhoods, need to have buy-in with whatever effort you're going to do. We have four different historic districts in our little community. Now, I'm not saying what we're doing is going to make the purist pleased. The purist is not going to be pleased with some of the things we've done in some of the neighborhoods. But there's a reason for that. We have the National Register Historic District and the local residential area. In that district, it is strict. The ordinances are strict. The type of material you can use are strict. You have to, the certain architectural style is strict. The people in that community bought into that, and they wanted that type of legislation and regulation. Then there's the commercial area. The commercial area did not want to be overburdened with that type of a bureaucracy. So they have their own historic structures. They wanted to maintain the historic structures that are there, but they wanted us to ease off the city, ease off on some of the regulations. And that's what we did. Then there's the fourth historic area, which is the Tribune Woods neighborhood, which is the historic African-American community. They wanted to preserve some of the history of the neighborhood without the very stringent regulations that's in the National Register District for economic reasons. They did not want the city imposing such a strict regulation. However, what they have seen is the benefit of tourism, and they have the Black Heritage Trail recognizing 4 sites and structures within the community, and we market that. So one size doesn't fit all. If you're a historic preservation purist, you may not like some of the efforts we have tried to do, but it seems to have worked.
I have a question for my fellow panelists. In the national designation, that's pretty much an honorarium. There are no restrictions or guide. You don't legislate from a historic district designation on the national level. So did you do an overlay of a city district designation on top of the national? How did you make the
We have a historic overlay district, and within the historic overlay district, actually, our house is in it. We have very strict regulation on if you want to add to your house, the type of building style, it's all there.
So my question is, you did an overlay on the national designation. You're not using the national designation as your codified rules and regulations. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, you would have had to have a local historic designation of that area in order to do the stiff regulations that you say, because as Yvonne pointed out, an NR, National Register, is really more honorary. And unless if there's a federal program, like a road going through, or something's federally funded, or licensed or something, you can pretty much do what you want with a NR designation. But if there was, say, for example, a road that was going through and it was going to have an impact on a National Register property or district, then they would have to take another look at it and see what they could do to, compensate that situation. So.
Just one to tag onto that. The other thing that really comes with a national designation is bragging rights. It's an extraordinary coup for a town to get that. It's a long, slogging process. It took us 5 years. And it wasn't because we didn't qualify, it's just because of the process of writing it the way Tallahassee wants to see it. Took that long, and we had a wonderful staff person, Sophia Belair, who helped us through the process. But it is still a long process. Once you get that, everybody in the community is just so extraordinarily proud of having achieved that and getting that designation, and can now market it out into the tourism world and the historic, other people who are looking for visiting historic sites. You get on the national list. It is an incredible generator of tourism for us. We really bring a lot more people down because of that designation, but it doesn't do anything to protect our buildings. You've got to do your local designations to protect your buildings.
I think that when it comes to, you asking what our favorite examples of historical tourism and that type of thing, I think all of us have, when we go someplace to visit, I think this is important to put in the perspective of our own personal experience. And when we go someplace to visit, and we go, whether it's to see our relatives or go to Georgia or Indiana, wherever you go, you want something to do when you go there. And invariably, you seek out these things. Everyone does. You want to go see the historical battlefield. You want to go to the little historical village where there's something to do. Those are the things that make that cultural experience that that experience you have in the community. If those things weren't there, and you know, you can only spend so much time in front of the TV set. Most of us can only spend so much time from the TV set. So no matter where you go, those are the things that you seek out. And even though we're a beachfront community, when it comes to Bonita Springs, there's a great deal of the culture that we have here that doesn't involve structures or buildings. They just don't. And I think we can do. I was reminded yesterday by we have a habit of thinking linearly. First, we need to do 1, 2, 3, and then 4. No, we need to do all those things. All those things need to happen. And so, one of the things that I think we need to do as a community to get to be one of those places is to celebrate, you know, what we have in common. The commercial fishing, the building of nets, the entire thing. Those people are still in this community today, but we don't give them a forum and an area to where they can practice that and they can share that with people on a daily basis.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on that, it's great to develop areas to bring in tourism dollars, but I also think that there has to be a balance between keeping these redevelopment efforts local, so that you have the local people that are also enjoying those experiences, but they're also the business owners. So there are instances. The one I can think of is like Hyde Park in Tampa, where that whole area went under redevelopment, and in came the Gap and Chico's and all of these national chains, and out went all the local business owners. And then it becomes like any other homogeneous area in our country. I mean, it's really, these areas, the uniqueness of the character and the history of those areas needs to be preserved in what's built on, and it needs to be in such a way that the local people are part of it and can enjoy it and also prosper from it. So,
a couple of things. I'm familiar with Lake City, and many of you know the area of Lake City in the northern area of Florida. The Lake City Columbia County Historical Museum is one, and the city manager there has said that the house was of the 1870s era, and they called it Italianate, which I thought was an interesting kind of architecture. I think they made it up, but nevertheless, it was. And the key to this one, in my mind, was this turned out to be, their courthouse had burned down, so this was their old structure, and turned out to be a museum that contained a lot of the things that were of the old time of that particular northern Florida area. So inside the museum was a formal parlor that was in the late 1800s, and they gathered a lot of different architectural, archaeological aspects, and turned that house, which happened to be their focal point in terms of the historical, into a museum. Then their CRA was built around that, and actually made it much more powerful sort of a thing. It's interesting, Florida architecture, 100 years in 100 places. Did anybody see that article? I brought some. When you think about the top 10 or even the top 100 places in Florida, how there are different unique areas that are special to the hometown area or the county or city where they are. And if you have that as your focal point, then that seems to be what's important. It's not so much what it is, but what the interest is for the people that are there. And in Lake City, this Columbia County Historical Museum has been their magnet that has allowed them to be the centerpiece for what's going on.
One of the themes that I think I'm hearing is that this has more to do with just a building or a structure, and more to do even than with historic districts. The mayor said it's part of developing an identity, remembering where we came from, what we did, how we did it, who those people are, and if you're lucky enough and they're still part of your community, to celebrate and encourage that to keep happening. So my question is, and I'm kind of curious to get your input, and also the input of particularly the property owners here, how do you do that? I understand that it's important to do that, but how do you do it in a sense, and the particular question is, how do you maintain the balance between trying to encourage those things which may have had a different life expectancy and new things that are coming on the horizon? And the example I want to kind of give to put this in context is something that happened or is happening now in Lee County, the unincorporated county. On the San Carlos Island side of Fort Myers Beach, they had a fairly vibrant, still working shrimping community, shrimp community, which met head-on with the need for, or at least the desire, the perception for the need for waterfront development. So how do you maintain those balances? How do you still encourage and celebrate what was part of your past and still part of your identity, but keeping that kind of balanced against what might be competing economic interests? And more importantly, whose role is that? Is that the city's role? Is that the property owner? How does that happen? So I'm kind of curious.
In my opinion, it really has to be a combination of the community, the people within the community, and the local government officials. And I think one of the things, for example, in Bonita Springs that you've done, you have the CLG, you become a CLG, Certified Local Government. What this does is it provides you to pass, if you already have the enabling, through enabling legislation, you are able to pass a tax abatement program, which provides allows people to make changes in their homes or improvements, I should say improvements in their homes, their historic homes, following the guidelines, the Secretary of Interior guidelines, and then those improvements, the taxes on that are abated for 10 years. That's an incentive. Another incentive is the federal tax credit program that is provided through the National Park Service and in combination of the State Historic Preservation Office, the Division of Historical Resources, that allows, this is for income producing properties, commercial, and it covers hotels. It does not cover individual homes, but you can get a 20% tax credit for improvements by following the Secretary of Interior guidelines. And again, I don't know if you still have your grant program, but the grant programs also helps people to make improvements following the certain rules and regulations. So it really has to be a combination of the people who want it and the people who can make it happen, which are your officials. That's my thought.
To keep this theme going, the city or local government can't do it alone. The community can't do it alone. You have to have a partnership and a collaboration. I think this is the third time we're hearing this, or fifth time. You cannot do it alone. If you have in your community some well-established groups, the local government needs to embrace them and bring them on the fold. You have, I guess in Bonita, a historical society. Some other communities are fortunate to have a mural society, a volunteer group that promotes the historic murals. Not everybody may have that. Some communities do. Whatever community or neighborhood groups are out there, they have to partner with your local government. Sometimes it takes a natural disaster for a community to say, you know something, when we rebuild, we can't lose our history. You get complacent. When a natural disaster hits you, you then have an opportunity to rebuild with that history as a component of that. Now, we were fortunate in that sense. We had a natural disaster, and we had a number of historic buildings that were saved or damaged, but were able to be saved. We were fortunate because we have very well-established groups. We have a very well-established historical society. We have a very well-established mural society. So much so that the community saw the benefit of making sure that those neighborhoods and those programs remained and thrived. And the local government was a big part of that. But it couldn't have done it by itself. It needed that strong community group. The business owners saw the value of that. And as the rebuilding took place, saw all the visitors coming into the community and taking mural tours taking tours of the historic neighborhoods, redoing the brick streets, which was kind of a thing that's there, and it's preserved. And it's so much so that when a new property owner took over a particular building and painted over a historic mural, that was a major crisis. That might not have happened years ago. Somebody may have painted over a mural and it might not have been so sensitive, but it was. And as soon as that was done, another property owner said, I am taking what was on that building and I'm going to redo the mural on their building. So that mural was saved. But that was very sensitive at that point, because the value of historic preservation and tourism that we've all been talking about is now a very vital component of the community.
Sure, go ahead, John.
Just to kind of expand on that, it's really, you know, the grassroots effort is critical, but it's the public, the partnership with the government is just as critical. There has to be a sort of a building of a sense of ownership of the importance of what you're trying to preserve, and that sense of ownership has to be throughout the community and with the public body that represents the community. And then on top of that, we have to be able to give the government the tools to be able to say no to things, to development pressure that might come in.
One thing that I've noticed over the years in working with different communities is at some point you crystallize a vision. You know, with Bonita Springs, you then look at your strengths. And one thing that you have as a background is the tremendous amount of art activities that you have. You can see it if you know, cities and communities have personalities just like people. And as you keep looking back into the city in terms of the strengths and artistic and how that works into a vision, and as Shelley is saying, at some point when you actually have something that's a plan, everybody ends up being irritated when that plan is not being followed. That's much better than actually regulation. It's funny that you mentioned the mural aspect in Punta Gorda in Lake Placid. When somebody bought one of the buildings with a mural painted over it, they boycotted the business until that guy actually sold it and got out of town. They did the very same thing. So two different cities. And really, if you think about it, again, it takes a lot longer amount of time than you think before something becomes, wow, they're known for that. I don't know if you know the little place in Tavares in Lake County. They're just now getting recognition now for being the place where the seaplanes go in, and they've made that as part of their redevelopment. Many of you may remember the name Bill Neron. He used to be in Lee County and actually was in Naples in economic development. They fought through that idea of getting ready for the seaplanes and how that would be part of the attraction of people then coming into their CRA downtown area. So again, once you get a focal point on where the vision is, then stick to it. It comes from years of looking at what the strengths are and then developing those and making sure you're not inconsistent. Probably the worst thing is if you have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of this, and never actually stick to one thing. But then again, the other side is to make sure that you don't have something, and Bonita is not going to be the place that has everything be in colors like Boca Raton, you know, or you know, and that sort of thing. So it is finally getting a vision that you're end up being consistent with, but at the same time you build on the strengths.
Before we take a break, which we probably need to do in a few minutes, I think we have a couple of people in the audience that have a question or follow-up.
Yeah, Charlie, I have a question. Ben brought up what I think is a very good question for people in the Historical Society and people who live in gated communities. And this may not be the forum immediately, but how do you get these people out of the gated community and into the real community and caring and contributing?
I can't really answer your question, but I have an idea that I think might work because I do this. Go to them, go to their community, find out who, usually an HOA or whatever it is, find out who the offices are, and ask for some time for a special little get-together or whatever and put a program together. Go to them and get them interested.
The other aspect is, this is where a Main Street program is really helpful, because of the Main Street program, our 4-point program, part of it is promotion. And we go out there and create events that are exciting, fun. Everybody's heard of the food truck phenomenon. We've brought that down to Homestead. People had never seen food trucks. They knew lunch wagons. They didn't know food trucks. But they saw this food truck phenomenon come to Homestead, and we used to have people, maybe 200 people show up downtown for an event. We're up to 800 to 1,200 now at every one of our events, because it's a new phenomenon. So through the Main Street program, through their promotion arm of that program, we've been able to create a very exciting downtown that people want to come out and see. Now we're getting people from those gated communities coming in and saying, I had no idea downtown looked like this. They are just amazed. So creating excitement, creating buzz, that gets people out of their communities.
Let me try to put that in context a little bit. And Becky, it's a great question. It has to do with demolition delay for particular structures. And just to put it in context for the panel that might not be familiar, the Historic Preservation Board has been working with the concept of some kind of a trigger mechanism that would mandate that before a property owner can demo a particular piece of property, there would be a delay built in so that it could either be preserved or salvaged, or at least documented as to what the structure, what the significance was. Now, we're kind of unique in that we have almost 20 properties that have been designated as historic under our ordinance, and there is already a built-in demolition delay for those properties. But we do not have any historic districts, and any designation would have to be voluntary on the part of the owners to add to that list. So the quandary we're left in is that there's an inventory of potentially significant structures that are not, at this time, are not subject to that delay. So we're kind of working with how do we deal with that. So I think the question is, what kind of history do you have?
How does the delay help in the regulations scheme of things? That's, I guess, what I don't quite understand.
To address the question of delay, the Homestead is a CLG. We are a certified local government, our Historic Preservation Board. So we have the authority to designate a property. Even if the property owner does not want it to be, if we feel it's important and significant to the community, we don't do it normally. We always work with the homeowner or the property owner. We always try to make sure they're on board. We've had 2 instances in the past 7 years that I know of where they did not want it, and we went ahead and designated it. In that context of a designated structure, there is if the property has certain failings, that it's not structurally sound, it's not going to be retrievable, then we can go through a demolition issue. They can apply for a demolition. We decertify it. We take the property off the certification list. After it's off the list, then it goes through normal planning and permitting and licensing for demolition. If it's a designated structure and there's no reason for it to be demolished, then that would be obviously where we would fight tooth and nail to keep the property viable. Now, a non-designated structure, we have no authority over it. Unless it's designated, we have absolutely no authority on a property that does not have the protection of designation.
So you don't have a demolition delay in that instance in your city?
In the context of a demolition of a structure, there's a normal 90-day grace period. We have to go through review and...
Only if it's designated, right?
But if it's designated, then you fall under the auspices of the Historic Preservation Board, and they review a demolition request, and unless it has a viable reason for not being designated any further, they take off that designation protection, then it can go through normal permitting for a demolition. And that's a 90-day process.
I'm aware of, I believe, 2 communities that have worked towards what you're talking about or what we're talking about here. One was Boca Raton, where it's for all undesignated properties that were built before a certain date, like I'm going to say 1932 or 1940, whatever it is. And if they're not designated, they're just older properties. And if they were, the intent was, if they were going to get a permit for demolition, then because of when they were built or what's on record, that would trigger, they would, through the cooperation of the planning board or whoever it is, the permitting board, would, or permitting department, would contact the preservation community, so to speak, and then they would start working with the property owner or whoever it is who wants to demolish the building. The idea is that if you, because there's usually a little time frame there, it's not going to happen tomorrow, that the idea is to try to see if somebody else might be interested, or if they can move the building, or if somebody else might want to buy the building, or whatever. Try to rally the community, maybe through articles or through personal contact and that. And that's one community that I know have tried to do that. Now, has it been successful? Not totally, but and it's not formal either. There was no legislation. That's what they were fighting for, but it's an informal process at this point in time because that's all they could rally. You know, you have to have the cooperation of the political officials to pass these kinds of things, as you know, and it's not easy.
Right up the street in Punta Gorda, we have a demolition delay ordinance. It is for properties within the historic overlay district, not the designated, registered designated properties, but the other properties. It doesn't always work. There are successes and then there are failures, exactly as what this speaker just said. It allows time for the historical board, the Historic Society, and community groups to try and garner support, financial support, to save the structure either by purchasing the property from the property owner or moving it. There have been some successes and there have been some failures, but that's all we can do.
It's easy, I think, for most all of us here to see the positive of a demolition delay. I mean, it's almost, to me, it's kind of like the gun laws, you know, where you can't buy a gun and have it that same day. It's a period set aside for specific purposes. I think we can see the potential for positive. What are your experiences in your communities with, say, the other side, when it doesn't work? Has it caused a real hardship or economic problems for the property owners themselves? Because that's what it comes down to. That's who owns these structures. So have you had instances or where the owner said this is onerous, and you know, is there a way to waive it, or you know, what's the downside? I guess because for me it's easy to see the upside. Do we have any experiences?
The answer is yes. It can be onerous for the property.
You've had some, and they say we can't wait 90 days, we have to tear it down tomorrow, type situation.
Yes. The property owner has to get what they do is they get an inspector to do a report that talks about the condition of the building, whether it's salvageable or not, is it over 50%, what's that, 50% rule?
Yeah, not conforming, it was more 50% of the value than you end up having.
And they can then appeal to the historic board and then ultimately city council. And it's going to be torn down unless somebody can come purchase the building or it can be moved. It will be torn down. And it's too bad, but you know, there's an expression now we have in Punta Gorda, and that is just because it's old doesn't mean it's architecturally significant or it should be saved. Not every old structure is so significant that when it's really damaged, it has to be saved. So some of the properties that have come down, okay. It's the really significant ones that we really try to save.
And who defines what's significant? That's the key question. It doesn't have to be an architectural gem, but it can have tremendous historical significance to your community. Homestead's not known for its architecture, but it is known for its history in Henry Flagler's Railroad and the growth of agricultural farmlands in South Florida. It's very hard to sell the argument these buildings are significant architecturally, except for the context, which I think is very important, which is vernacular architecture. But it is important to the community, and when you rally the community that an old home that was owned by one of the founding families of Homestead is going to be demolished, you'd be amazed how many people show up because their family knows that family that knows the history of that town and that building. And I think it is important when you feel a building is under attack for being destroyed, that you do rally your community and make sure they understand what they're about to lose. We lost a beautiful mansion called the Webb House in Homestead. And curiously, Homestead's property in one street is still in the county. And on that street stood the Webb House. And the Historic Preservation Board had no authority. So I had to rush to the Miami-Dade County to get a designation for the property. And I came back with a designation in my hand to go by and see the demolished property. So over the weekend, the guy took the property down. So you have to get your community behind these buildings.
I don't think there's a demolition, reasonable demolition delay. It doesn't do any harm, and it does allow you to assess it and do a lot of things like that, I mean, regardless. But, however, I think that in a lot of ways, there's something missing. If you're having to do that, there's something missing. If we have to have that, then what's wrong is that your community isn't populated by people who appreciate the value of those structures. So I think that first the community has to adopt this narrative, this culture. They have to embrace a narrative and a culture that treasures that history, and that it becomes valuable then it has value. If you don't give it value through that narrative and that culture, and then you have people moving in there and buying those houses just for that specific purpose because they want that old house. Those are the people that you want to have in there. That you don't have to force them to keep it. They want that. You know, it's the same reason my wife and I built that. We didn't buy that to tear it down. We wanted that old home. We wanted it because of the character it had. And so I think that the first step is for people and for the community through various steps, various tools to go ahead and build that narrative, build that culture, and get everybody to appreciate it. Then you'll have the right people in the right place.
You're exactly right. It has to be the community, has to be the value, which we'll be discussing. But there's also one aspect to that I have seen here in our town, is that there is a core group of people, not all longtime residents, a lot of newcomers that I hear all the time. That's why I moved here, you know, is our character and charm. But one of the things that I see without a demolition delay ordinance is how would the community that Ben is talking about know that that building's going to be torn down? I remember the last significant one I saw, I learned about it while I was at a meeting after the permit was pulled, and the building was down the next day. So there's no time to even inform the community to check out offers. So unless a city decides when someone goes in for their permit to demolish it, that they inform someone, it's gone today. And we lose these buildings usually one at a time, except for national disasters.
Well, I'm just going to insert one thing, and you're talking about the Wayside Inn, all right? Now,
Yes, sir.
now, what surprised me about that, it's okay, no big deal. I'm not going to preach on that, but I always thought, you know what? That's when this community is really going to start treasuring things, is when something comes up missing. You know what? And this is my perception, but you know what I noticed after the Wayside Inn was torn down, and probably for various reasons and good reasons, wasn't retrievable. There seemed to be kind of a collective shrug from the community. That's what I heard. I didn't hear any great outrage. I didn't see anybody pining away for it. It was just exactly that. So without that, I mean, not that there weren't people that really cared, but overall, I didn't see a whole lot.
I agree with the panelist from Punta Gorda where he said that he indicated that not all old buildings should be saved, and I absolutely agree with that. But the point is, an older building should be saved if it has contributed to your community in many ways. You know, it has many stories to tell. It might be architecturally significant, it might not be, but it might have another type of history that's very important to your community, and you need to know that. So it's not, and a lot of that history is manifested within the walls of the building. So you really have to know, get to know your community, and don't save a building just because it's old, but save it because of what it has contributed over time to your community.
I recognize that in this community, you've got people that are seasonal in and out, and they come here to relax and have a good time. But I also believe that our elected officials and the organizations that are working very hard to create an image in this town need to take the lead on it. Because the folks that are in and out won't know how important it is until they look at it and see it and bring their friends and say, oh, isn't this a great thing? So it seems to me that that's where we should be heading. It's through our organizations, but to think that we're going to reach every community and get them to come out and rally for certain things, those of us that have had leadership roles in communities find that they're very apathetic about getting behind most anything. I'm sorry to say. So I would like to see, that we take the lead, the council, the organizations, the preservation board, and come up with what we all agree that we want to try to accomplish here and work together.
So what I'd like to do is kind of, again, go down through the list of different plans, actions, programs available to communities and governments that can help achieve things we've been talking about, heritage tourism, preservation, that sort of thing. So I thought we'd take the list, and as each of you have particular relevance, maybe briefly describe what they are. For instance, the first one on my list was local government downtown plans. I think we kind of covered that a little bit already, and everyone here kind of understands the word plan. Without a direct plan, you don't know where you're going, so to speak. There's no map. Most cities, it seems like, the smaller towns anyway, the bigger cities may have their own long-range planning and short-range planning departments. So I'm familiar with that. And I've noticed that in our city, LaBelle, probably Homestead, it was hired out to a consulting firm. And then those are kind of then given back to the city. The plans I've seen seem very professional and thorough. I sometimes wonder, what happens then? What is the process? Okay, here's the information given to the city. It's a nice professional book. What happens? So if you could just kind of discuss situations where you've seen the downtown plans kind of come to fruition, be part of it. So, Jim?
And sometimes,
Microphone for the camera.
a lot of situations, your downtown plans are implemented through what they call community redevelopment areas or districts, the CRAs, and the tie-in there, which is something that most people probably realize that they're familiar with CRAs. The funding a lot of times on a CRA is what they call the tax increment fund, which is the difference between when it be established as a CRA and then freezes the ad valorem for both the county and city at a certain point. That extra amount is the money that then is used to fund the infrastructure or whatever programs that are in the CRA. And the reason why the master plans sometimes are fairly consistent is that if there is a CRA, they have to, their CRA plan becomes the master plan, so to speak, is what you're saying, and they fund all the projects that are consistent with that plan. Now, in Bonita's case, a long time ago, the county actually, before they were city, had created them as a CRA, and it's no longer true. In Lee County, all the CRAs have gone. But that is a funding mechanism. In many cases, you'll hear people that have the downtown areas or have redevelopment plans have tied them into the community redevelopment districts themselves.
So the advantages are both financial, and out of that, it seems like there's usually either one, a board that oversees the CRA, or there's oftentimes, they will hire someone to
Well,
understand.
on the CRA, it'll either be the legislative body, and then have an advisory group, or in some cases, I don't know if there's any Cape Coral people, but Cape Coral actually still has other than the council that acts as the CRA. The preferable, as I go around and help, I've assisted in some of the CRA plans, the preferable thing probably is for the local policymakers to be the CRA. But sometimes you get into, and I'll let somebody else.
How does the downturn that's easy to understand CRAs during a growth period, I mean, such as our 80s and 90s, because like you say, you're kind of, not freeze taxes, but it comes back to the community. But when the tax base is not growing, in the situation we're in now, what does that do to your CRA?
Well, their fund is not as big as it was before, and in some cases, the TIF funds can be down to zero in the smaller places. So
At least
we're
you're
very
still
close
working towards it.
Still working toward it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
In the city of Homestead, we are a CRA district. The Main Street program is in the CRA district. The CRA, although the governing body is our elected council, we are actually funded by the county. So we have to go back to Miami-Dade County and report, we don't, but the CRA director does, and report expenditure of funds and get approvals. There is an intermediary level of government, which is our council, but the funding and everything, the approval for funding for CRA comes from the county. So we're a charter county, exactly. So we have two different forms of government that overview the CRA expenditure of funds. The monies that came into the CRA over the past few years is actually 50% cut this year. We went from 4 million last year, we're projecting 2 million this year.
You scale back your plan.
You scale back your plans, but conversely, while you're scaling back, this is a good time for planning. Because although you don't have the funds for the projects right now, now's the time you sit down and put pen to paper and start planning what you're going to do when the rebound occurs, God willing.
Yeah, and when it comes to just local government having a downtown plan, good. But the problem is, if you don't promote it, if the perception of the area is bad and you don't implement it, it doesn't do any good. You've got a plan sitting on a shelf. We have a plan. It's a pretty good plan. But so what we've kind of decided in the city now, and what Laura has been working on, is to come out with ways to promote the area. Because if you have incentives in the downtown area, which you do, if you have all kinds of building incentives or financial incentives, and no one knows about it, do they really exist? No, they don't. So that's a big part of it, and implementing it too. You've got to have a staff, and you've got to have community development on board, which we're working really hard with Arlene and everything like that, to where when somebody does come in and they want to wander their way through that, we want to be able to grab them by the hand and drag them through the process. So I think that those are probably more important than a CRA itself.
You know, Punta Gorda is a very old downtown, so there's a basic stormwater system in place. But as new development came on after the hurricane, each particular development was required to manage the stormwater on site until it got into the storm drains. Now, that did not hinder development. What helped, stormwater was the least of the issues. What helped the most was that the city used CRA funds to build a municipal parking facility right in the core downtown and relaxed the parking requirements dramatically for buildings in the core downtown so that they could build pretty much as lot to lot, lot to size. So
Zero lot line?
yeah, zero lot lines. Zero lot lines. And that really helped. Stormwater was not as much as the zero lot lines.
But it was funded through the CRA. And I guess one of my questions still remains. Most downtown plans seem like they wind up being implemented through the CRAs, which oftentimes will have either a full-time director or, I'm understanding, some of the council, local city council serves as the governing body themselves. When, or does anyone know of examples of when a downtown plan provided by maybe a consultant agency has been implemented without a CRA funding mechanism and the oversight? In other words, it's been said, if there's no one pushing the plan or promoting the plan, how does that actually happen? And most smaller towns don't have a downtown plan full-time employee. So how do you see it working without a CRA? Or do you?
Many communities, in many communities where she is in Dade County, it's tough now to actually get another CRA based on what's going on. So as long as you have a mechanism, and I'll have to echo what the mayor says, a lot of times you have the tools in place. There is a redevelopment plan that was done for Bonita that actually takes advantage of the zero lot line and things, but until you get people really realizing what it is, they're not taking advantage of that. The advantage of having the TIF funds or funds like that are the fact that if you had one particular thing that developers would appreciate and they wouldn't be doing themselves, like parking or a master sewer plan. We're involved in a community project in North Fort Myers, which is in the unincorporated area. It's a town center, and the developers are asking what can the county do for incentive for them to be able to go ahead and build together and united a bunch of developers in a 60-acre area. And Shelley's involved in another one in Lehigh Acres. And so that becomes sort of the carrot and the stick. If somebody is going to provide some infrastructure help, then the developers will be more likely to be able to come in. If the developers don't come in, then you can have those sitting and not used at all.
Well, I was going to say, within the Main Street program, one of the projects we were able to do was a facade program, which is something that went out to the whole downtown business community, and we did 12 buildings. They applied for a matching grant. They had to put up, actually it wasn't even matching, it was better than that. They put up 25%, the CRA put up 75%, and we were able to renovate the facades of 12 businesses in the downtown district. That's the benefit of a CRA and a CRA program or plan with a master plan, excuse me, the Main Street program in place with the manpower available to run the program for them. I mean, we have a CRA office, a CRA director and a staff of 2. Our Main Street program, we have a very large Main Street volunteer program. We have a large design committee, 2 architects running it, and we're all volunteers except for the staff, which is the 1 director. Everybody else is volunteers, but they're really motivated to create the downtown, and they get in there, and we use professionals to help us on our committees. It's really important when you staff these committees, you have people who know what they're talking about, as opposed to just people who like to be on a committee. So we really we reach out to the professionals. We ask in our economic restructuring, we've got bankers. In our design committee, we have architects. In our promotions committee, we have moi. I mean, for some reason, I got stuck with putting all the events on. But we do create a nice group of people who have common interests, but who have the time to put into the community. And that's what makes a strong Main Street program. The Main Street program, if you take time to go in and look into it, it's a 4-point program. Design is one aspect, and the economic revitalization is going out there, finding businesses. We were able to go out, there's a manufacturing company in South Florida that was in 5 different locations. I sat down with the president of the company, a woman who had just moved into Florida, and I said, have you ever heard of Homestead? We've got a lot of empty manufacturing space down there. Military, as you know, moved out pretty much after Hurricane Andrew. A lot of the contractors that worked with the military have moved out. So we had these big empty buildings, and I moved this construction, I showed this property to this lady, and she took all of her sites and moved in 28,000 square feet in Homestead and gave us 150 new jobs in production, in manufacturing, and it's an unskilled labor we have down our pool, and that's exactly what she was looking for. So there are people out there looking, and there are business opportunities, but through the Main Street program, you have professionals who can go out there and find those people. That's pretty much what the Chamber does. The Chamber's got the whole city of Homestead to deal with. Main Street focuses just on the downtown district. And I think that program is really vital for small towns in America. They do so much good, and they don't get enough press of what they actually are accomplishing.
Well, the Main Street program is overseen also by the state of Florida, and they will assist with education and expertise. How does it get funded unless it Or is it funded directly through the CRA funds and then they oversee their funds?
Yeah, the days of being fully funded through the city or through the CRA are pretty much vanishing. Money is just not out there anymore. So you have to go out there and get your corporate sponsorships. My salary is, a portion of my salary is paid for by the CRA, with a CRA grant, which I have to apply for every year. And then the other portion is through sponsorships and through donations and through event planning. And successful event planning means you make some money off your events, so you don't do it just for you want everybody to have a good time, but you also want to get some financial benefit out of it so that you can continue growing your program. So it's a 3-point program of getting funds into your program, either through event planning, through promotions, and through sponsorships, and of course membership. So that brings the dollars into the program. You cannot rely, I don't think any Main Street program today can rely on government support wholly. It's just not going to happen anymore. There is, in the heyday of the Main Street program, the CRAs back in 2005, you got tremendous funding. That isn't true today. So you have to be a little bit more proactive. But if you show yourself to be a tool for businesses, you know, exposing them to downtown, showing them the benefits of moving their business into the downtown, you can get a benefit from their membership in your program.
I agree with everything that Yvonne said about Main Street. 100%.
But
There's a but. Because there is another side. And I guess Bonita has the potential to be successful with the other side. There is a movement afoot, it seems like, to create a Main Street program. And if you do, great. It's a great program. There are some grants available through Main Street for technical assistance. You do have to have somebody who is dedicated to Main Street. If your community has a very active chamber and a very active downtown business association, active in the sense that they're doing the 4-point programs that Main Street has, and if they are not afraid to be putting on festivals and to be doing the marketing and the promotion, you may not need a Main Street. Punta Gorda was designated as Main Street after the hurricane. Punta Gorda was proud to get designated as Main Street after the hurricane. With all the 4 points, hired an individual to manage the Main Street program. But at the same time, the city had a very active chamber of commerce and a very active downtown business association that took on the mantra, is doing the festivals, is doing the marketing, is doing the promotion, and Punta Gorda disbanded its Main Street program, handed it over to the Chamber of the Downtown Business Association to carry it on. It may be a total failure, but there is another side to this, that if you choose not to go to the Main Street venue, you can still be very successful. Main Street used all of the excess funds to fund certain projects that the community felt were the downtown folks felt were the priorities. No other funding, just basically disbanded and handed over those responsibilities in name to those organizations that have so far carried on the mantra. Now let's see everything from festivals downtown, downtown farmers market, putting billboards up on I-75, promoting the Punta Gorda downtown. Those things, they're carrying on. Whether they continue to do it years from now, time will tell. Time will tell.
How long have you been on this second phase?
How long have we been on it? 2 years. Not very long.
That you disbanded Main Street?
Not long. But
Have
let's
you
see.
noticed much of a distinction in the 2 time periods, or is it too early to tell is what you're basically saying?
There's been no distinction, but it's way too early. It's really too early. Main Street is a very structured program. It's a really good program, but we've tried a different approach, and let's see if it works.
Well, we're Americans, and we want it all, and we want it all now. Keep that in mind here.
Charlie?
Which question, Trish?
It might be off on this area, but I have 2. One, On your Main Street programs and all of the programs that you're doing in your communities and in your cities, how are you integrating the diversity of the cultures? For instance, not everybody in Old Bonita is white, okay? So we have a diversity of different types of business owners. Are you involving your cultures on the committees that how do you integrate it all? Does anybody have any come across that?
Right, we do. We have a very diverse community in Homestead. We've got the Mexican-American community, we've got an African-American community, we have Nicaraguan, Guatemalan, Central America covered. The majority of our community is Hispanic. And we do strike, and I don't speak Spanish, so I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. But I work really hard to make sure everybody's included. We have a Cinco de Mayo festival. We do the African American Heritage Month in May. We do Black History Month, pardon me. We do as much as we possibly can to make sure it's an inclusive downtown for everybody. We just put a Montessori school downtown. We now have, if you want to do anything to enliven your downtown community, find a school, a small school, and bring the children into your parks. When families see children playing in your parks, all of a sudden they think, oh, it's a family-friendly community. And you'll see an amazing change to your downtown. We put a Montessori school downtown. The children play in our park. They don't have green space in their school. They come to our park to play every day at noon, and it's a magical moment, and everybody stops, people stop traffic and watch the children play. So it really has been tremendous, and that school is very, very diverse. So yes, we do try to include all of our community in everything we do. We do the food truck event, of course, but we also have many other events. We have our bike festival. Every month we have an event.
I'm not talking events though, I'm just talking how are you reaching out to the small business owners that are on your Main Street strip?
Well, we ask
Are they part of your committees and all of that?
Yes, yes. We have, as I said, we have a large Main Street organization. We have the business owners. Most of our restaurants are Mexican American downtown. Those business people who own those restaurants are on our committees. They help us plan our events. They were very involved with our facade program. We made sure that all of the businesses of our 12 applicants, most of them were people who were living, working on Washington Avenue, which is kind of a more economically challenged street, and they all applied, and we made sure they were weighted to make sure that they got their grants.
Do they pay a fee to be on your committee? I mean, do all the merchants have to pay a fee to be part of this?
Membership, yes. Again, in the economically oppressed area, we try to get them involved rather than being a paid member. We try to get them just to be part of the program. My goal is to going out for corporate memberships. So I'm going out to Turkey Point, FPL, the major corporations, selling them a $500 corporate membership. They get their logos and everything we do. They get their identification signed with Main Street, but that gives the money for all of our programs. So I'm not trying to nickel and dime the small business owners so much as trying to get buy-in from all the corporations in our community to help the downtown district.
One thing to keep in mind is that most of the successful cities in redevelopment have taken on different structures. Some have been CRAs only, and they have a funding source. Some have been without a CRA, without a Main Street program, without anything. But the ones that are successful have a vision, find the infrastructure money or money at some point, and have people devoted to carry out or implement that plan and actually brand or market it to businesses that actually do the redevelopment. So you're going to find, I know Shelley and I work a lot of different places, and tell you Moorhaven depends on their Main Street program as part of in the business association, but you can go to Tavares and they don't. And there are probably no more than 20 or 30 Main Street communities out of 412 cities in the state of Florida. So it isn't just a Main Street program, but
it's actually 70.
So 70.
Hopefully a big part of what we'll be discussing is the show me the money part. You know, that's how we'll get to individual ones, not just to understand, oh, there's money available through so-and-so, but from your experiences, what is work, what is practical to go after. Kind of leads me in to the question of plans, downtowns, and we mentioned specifically before build on what you already have. And one of the wonderful things that was done primarily through the leadership of Dan and a few other people in our city is what's usually called visioning or branding sessions. In other words, what do you think you have, or at least what do the people think you have, and so you know where to build. That seems to be a aspect of one of the first stages of building a downtown plan. I've noticed in your visioning sessions or stakeholder meetings, those sorts of things. What role does that play in our discussions? In other words, if you're talking heritage tourism and that, what do you have? How did that work in your communities?
Well, if you're just getting started, that's the key thing you need to do, is you need to do a strategic planning or visioning session to basically see what direction you want to go in. You don't need to spend all that money on a cute brand. I mean, you can develop it yourself. You can develop it through your visioning session. But yes, I think it's a vital component. It has certainly helped not only Punta Gorda, but I'm sure it's helped a lot of other communities to go through that process.
Have y'all revisited that, or is this something that was done years ago and Punta Gorda is the city of the, say,
It was
smart
done
city
in
of Florida?
1989 and 90 as part of the downtown plan development, and it was revisited in 2012 during the months of April through May.
Which is now.
Now.
So they may or may not change. Correct?
Oh, no, it will change.
Oh,
It will change.
But one thing that I do want to point out that I think is really kind of missing here is that I think is real important, and I didn't think about it until today, so thank you, Charlie, was that there really isn't a narrative when it comes to the culture of the community, the historical culture. And you know what? Yeah, you can point in your brochure and historical notions, and a lot of us have lived here for a while. We know the history of Bonita, but before you can start planning events and museums and all the special things to where you can have historical tourism or have all that, you have to have that done. That narrative and that culture has to be adopted, and so that it can be embraced by everyone, not just the Historical Society, not just the Historical Preservation Board. The entire community has to be on board that we're, that we're adopting this, and people will fall in love with it. But I think that's a pretty good process and a good project, for the historical committee is to develop that, and it doesn't need to be much. It's not a brand. It's just a narrative. What's our culture that we do want to preserve? What is it?
Promote.
And promote.
And promote. Both.
As a follow-up on that, the city of Maitland used the art theme, and the art building is their center for their redevelopment. And by doing that, and that's something that's taken mind from Bonita as much as you've done the artisan kind of things, where they actually have a property that's based on being the art museum and then a lot of things around that. So there is some redevelopment based on that theme that was developed in the vision. I know I was involved in Fort Pierce thinking of what you were saying, and Ramon Triez was doing some of that stuff in the early 90s for the city. So it takes a while for some of those things to catch hold.
I was going to say, as a warrior of the veteran of the Charette wars out there, nothing is more exciting than a community that thinks we're a military community. The other, we're an agricultural community. The other one's we're a national parks community, and another one group says we're a small business community. And they all around the same table fighting vehemently for their identity, which they think should be the imprimatur for your community. So it can be a really lively discussion. Charettes can be wonderful. They can be also something that you walk away from, shaking your head saying, what did we just go through? Because nothing gets resolved. So I agree with the concept of visioning. I also agree with taking a professional, bringing them into your community and saying, okay, guide us in this process. Tell us, help us along the way, because if you leave it just to the community, passions rise and everybody gets really upset with each other. So I've been through both, and I'm now about to work with Bermeo from Miami, and they're helping us on the vision.
And as well as that, I sometimes question is who attends the charrette.
Yeah.
It is.
Well,
You know, you'll be heavily influenced by one direction or the other. Before we're going, you had a follow-up?
yeah, I'm playing on that, is charrettes should not be done just by members of the community per se. You really do need leadership there. You need to have somebody who knows what they're doing. And you need to have people, a total cross-section of the community involved. And you need to interview the officials, you need to interview the property owners, you need to have all the culturals that they're all part of that, in order to be successful. It's not, you want to give input, you want to be heard, but you also need professionalism to give you some guidance and direction. And, you know, at the bottom line is you feel like, you know, what came out of it, I was part of that, and I was, you know, it's a good thing.
Things I mentioned earlier, and I think we were talking, Joe and I, and maybe Gary, was so we're very fortunate in our community to have great volunteers who serve on various committees on behalf of the city or behalf of a chamber or behalf of whatever organization we're involved in. And with all of our expertise on the various committees that we have, and not that I want to have another committee, but, you know, we have an downtown arts committee, we have a tree advisory committee, we have a historical committee, we have a special events committee, that perhaps there could be a liaison from each committee to form another committee.
Say it,
But,
don't
you
say
know,
it.
just form something, a society, I don't know what you want to
You
call it.
need someone to pull it together.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
that could, because we've already been working, a lot of us working on committees already, so we already know kind of the touch of everything, and we're all passionate about one thing, Bonita Springs. So if there's a way we could pull together all the talent and put them into a room like this and say, hey, this is what my committees, because a lot of times we don't know what each other committees are doing until we go to a council meeting, or if we hear about it, or if we serve on more than one committee.
We're operating under our 501c3 nonprofit statute. We do not have to publicly notice our meetings. We're not we're not a government committee. We're not appointed by the city council. The Main Street director is hired by the board of directors of the Main Street program. I don't work for the city of Homestead. Now, if I were an advisory committee to the city of Homestead, then everything the Florida Sunshine Law would apply. But because we're a complete standalone organization, we get some funding from CRA, but we're not directly funded by the city of Homestead.
And Trish, and you are exactly right. Who then pulls that together? How do you pull that community together? Without a full-time paid person or a Main Street program, wow, that's tough. It's not impossible, but I'd love to hear other examples. Also, yes,
Sorry. Just real quick, in terms of visioning and getting input, we all have to recognize that, first of all, not everybody likes to come to a meeting and speak their mind, and that a lot of the effort that's being put forth today is for future generations. And so the reality is social media is like the wave of the future. So you have to keep in mind that if you're trying to get input from the public on different things, and this might include business owners who just don't have the time to come to a meeting, you have to include some other ways that they can speak their mind and give you feedback. And so, it's the reality of today. So my recommendation is to don't forget that source of contact for getting input.
Can I ask a follow-up question along those lines? Because you mentioned getting input from property owners, business owners. And this question maybe narrows the focus a little bit. We've been talking about some pretty broad issues. But as a staff liaison, one of my concerns is how do I help the board that I'm working with get their message out? Today's a perfect example. They tried doing a direct mail out to property owners in this specific targeted area. They followed up with phone calls. They did outreach to particular individuals and business owners that they know who own properties in the targeted area. And we still, while I appreciate everyone being here and everything, I think that I can say from my expectations, I was hoping to reach a broader audience within the target area. Having said that, I guess what I'm looking for is, does anybody have any tricks, any insight, any input that they can offer on strategies for getting folks who are obviously dealing with their day-to-day issues, maybe not connecting the dots the way the Historic Preservation Board connects the dots. How do we get that message across? What can we try that we maybe haven't tried?
Well, I mean, like I've recently worked on one project where we set up a blog, and we would actually on a weekly basis pose a question on the blog to try to get people to respond so that we could gather information for people that way. So it kind of triggered the conversation that then began on the blog. I mean, that was one thing that we did. We also created a survey, an online survey, and tried, getting some information that way. And it was fairly successful. But in terms of like actually getting property owners involved and coming to meetings, if anybody has an idea, I'd love to hear it.
We know how to do it.
We know,
Yes.
I happened to be in Satellite Beach the other day on the redevelopment and comp plan, and people were notified that the city planned to take away their property, so we ended up.
Early not taking away property.
So, other than having to be beat up for a little while.
That would get their attention.
I haven't had that many people in a long time. You're tongue in cheek, but I think sometimes, unfortunately, the more negative is going to get people.
That's a huge question. How do you involve the stakeholders? They're the ones with the vested interest. They're the ones that own the historical properties, oftentimes archaeological sites as well. So how do you engage them? We're still waiting on the tricks, huh?
Well, just to follow up on what can you give the stakeholders, the business owners? The Main Street program, what we try to do for our business owners downtown is we try to be one-stop shopping for them for permitting, licensing, and approvals. So they know if they come to us, we'll walk them through the process that they want to do some painting, they want to do some construction changes. We understand how the city, what documents the city requires. We understand the process. We explain it to them. We actually take them by the hand and take them over to City Hall, sit down with a licensing officer there, help them if they have a language issue. We help them out with that. So we really walk them through. We act like a permitting officer. And we try to help the business owners who are in our district, who are in the downtown district, to go through a cumbersome process. And once you're seen as a go-to entity where they can get answers, you'll find that when you walk in the door and ask them to participate in a program or get involved with our facade program or get involved in a promotion event, they're open, the door's open, they want to talk to you because you've done something for them. So I think it's very important, whatever entity you evolve into, whether it's Main Street or business, be a resource that the business owner can come to, and that really helps your relationship with those. I think communication is the most important thing. Main Street has a program where we go out, the board president and myself go to each one of these organizations and do a dog and pony show, do a slide presentation of what Main Street's doing right now, what we've done historically, why we're here. So they understand our program. They understand, they buy into it, and they understand exactly what we're trying to do to contribute to the community. And we respect what their role is in the community. I think it's very important that the Main Street or whatever organization you finally adopt has an organic growth in the community. You're not just another new group coming in town. You're built with all these people and all these volunteers you have in this community, that they support the program because they're part of it and they're part of other groups that are connecting to you. It's really important you all work together.
An idea you may want to try, it has worked in Punta Gorda so far, is a citizens group after the hurricane formed what's called Team Punta Gorda. They raised funds to do a citizens master plan, and after the plan was completed by a professional planner, they stayed in place. And they are a 501c3 organization. They have committees made up of folks from all the neighborhoods in the city, and also representation from all of the well-established organizations, the Historical Society, the Mural Society, the Downtown Merchants Association, the Chambers. They're all a part of these committees, and it's a very well-established group called Team Punta Gorda. They work hand in hand with the local government in concrete projects, from maintenance of the parks to other beautification efforts, to festivals, to you name it, and they have stayed in place. They didn't go away.
A community foundation, a nonprofit community foundation.
They're not a foundation. They are
No.
Team Punta Gorda. They're a 501c3 made up of citizens of Punta Gorda. They are not a foundation.
Like the Friends of,
Yeah.
so.
Yes. And they have stayed in place, and they're fairly strong.
What, since we're talking about monies, raising money, what are strategic, successful strategies for revitalizing older downtowns, such as transfer of development rights programs and grants in that area? What, anybody here on the panel have experience with the TDRs, transfer of development rights?
I've had very little, I pushed that a lot in Boca Raton, but I didn't get very good reception from the city on that. I know New York has been very, very successful in TDRs. But, New York City, right. But the thing is, it is a tool that can be used. It's not simple. In many ways, it's easier than zoning, but in other ways, it's difficult because it's long-term. You know, it's not like zoning that changes all the time. Once it's done, it's done. So it takes initiative and it takes somebody to continue oversight. You know? So it's never been received well, although it's a good possibility of an option for you.
Punta Gorda has in our codes transfer of development rights built in for historic preservation, affordable housing, and environmental protection. No applications have been made.
That was what I was going to ask you, how many applications?
Zero.
We have one too.
I don't know if we made it too difficult, but we don't have any.
It's too difficult to get.
There's a couple aspects. Environmental, you'll see it for environmental lands more than you will anything else. Say if you protect this, we'll let you transfer the density over there. I'm familiar with Satellite Beach, try to do some of that in order to have some more open space area. Difficulty is that if you already have the ability to have density that's near that, there's no incentive to do that. Second problem is that it's awful complicated and you have to have somebody devoted to it administratively around the clock in order to be able to do it. And then the third thing is the market aspect gets into it because it gets very detailed. I've got credits for TDRs that I can sell to so-and-so and they go up and
NIMBY is
down.
a big part of this.
So it's tough. What?
NIMBY is a big part of it.
And none of my backyard is where I want the
I
density.
love the program, but you're not going to move those units.
You're not going to put 4,000 units in my backyard when I thought the high
That's the
density
killer.
was going to be 70 units. Or whatever.
Well, we've obviously just kind of scratched the surface on phase one, but we've certainly put the fears that we're going to run out of things to talk about because literally barely got into the notes yet.